Duke and Duchess of Sussex to Australia. All week they have been right across BBC News, online, breakfast, the news channel, the lunchtime news and the news at 6.
Now, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have arrived in Australia at the start of a 4-day visit, their first since leaving the royal family.
And viewers were swift to express their disapproval. Among them was Rachel Lane. I am disappointed with the way the BBC are covering the private trip to Australia by ex-royals Harry and Meghan. The BBC do not report on other celebrities' holidays or visits to hospitals, communities, etc. So I think it is ridiculous and completely unnecessary that the BBC are reporting on this as if it is an official royal tour. Phil Seymour was similarly unimpressed. I am not generally an activist, but I fail to understand why the BBC finds it necessary to give so much news coverage to the trip. They are private citizens, not connected now to the royal family or involved with any activity that promotes this country. They only promote themselves. If my wife and I visit Australia next year, will you put us on every news segment? No. We asked BBC News why there was such extensive coverage, and they said, "There remains strong and consistent audience interest in members of the royal family, including the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Despite no longer being working royals, they still have high public profile and international recognition. Our reporting has primarily come from our local bureau in Sydney and has focused on newsworthy developments during the visit, including comments and engagements that have attracted wider attention. We have delivered proportionate coverage of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's visit to Australia. As with all our output, editorial decisions have been made in line with our standard guidelines to ensure appropriate balance and relevance."
Hello everybody, welcome back to our channel, and thank you so much for tuning in once again. If you are new here, please don't forget to subscribe, like and share this video so more people can join in on these conversations. And to our returning viewers, your continued support truly means everything. It allows this space to grow. It keeps these discussions alive, and it ensures that we can continue speaking openly about topics that matter to so many people around the world. Today we are diving into a powerful and necessary conversation that has stirred reactions, debates and strong opinions across media spaces. This is not just another trending topic. This is not just another headline that comes and goes. What we are looking at today is something deeper. A moment where media, public interest and narrative control all collide in a very visible way. So let's get right into it. Today's discussion centres on a firm and unapologetic response from the BBC regarding their coverage of Harry and Meghan's visit to Australia. Now, this response did not come out of nowhere. It came after consistent complaints from a group of critics, often referred to as Royalists, who have repeatedly pushed back against any coverage involving Harry and Meghan. For a long time now, these critics have been vocal. They have been persistent, and their message has been clear. They believe Harry and Meghan should no longer receive media attention, especially from major and respected platforms like the BBC. Their reasoning? They argue that since Harry and Meghan stepped away from royal duties, they no longer hold a position that justifies such coverage. They insist that the media should move on, shift focus, and essentially erase Harry and Meghan from regular reporting. But here is where the situation takes a decisive turn. The BBC did not agree, and more importantly, the BBC did not remain silent. Instead, they responded. And they did so in a way that made their position absolutely clear. They emphasised that their editorial decisions are guided by public interest, not by pressure from specific groups who believe they should control their narrative. That response matters. It matters because it challenges a growing pattern where loud voices attempt to dictate what should and should not be covered. It matters because it reinforces the principle that journalism exists to serve the public, not to satisfy the preferences of a select few. And most importantly, it matters because it highlights a truth that cannot be ignored. Harry and Meghan remain globally relevant. This is not speculation. This is not opinion. This is something that can be seen in real time across platforms, across audiences, and across countries. Their presence continues to spark conversations, generate engagement, and draw attention. The BBC acknowledge that reality, They made it clear that stories involving Harry and Meghan consistently attract viewership and public interest. And for a media organisation, that is a fundamental factor in deciding what gets covered. Now let's pause for a moment and really think about that. Media organisations operate in a space where attention matters, engagement matters, relevance matters. They are not simply reporting into a vacuum. They are responding to what audiences are interested in. And audiences are clearly interested in Harry and Meghan. So when critics say, stop covering them, what they are really asking for is not neutrality. They are asking for selective silence. They are asking the media to ignore a story that people are actively engaging with. And that is not how journalism works. It cannot work that way. Because once you start ignoring stories based on who complains the loudest, you compromise the integrity of reporting. You shift from informing the public to managing narratives. And that is exactly what the BBC refused to do. They stood firm. They acknowledged the criticism, but they did not let it dictate their decisions. They made it clear that their role is to reflect public interest, and that public interest in Harry and Meghan remains strong. Now let's take a closer look at the arguments made by critics. One of the most common claims is that Harry and Meghan are no longer part of the royal structure, and therefore they should not be treated as figures of significance. According to this line of thinking, their departure should have marked the end of their media relevance. But that argument falls apart when you consider how public interest actually works. Relevance is not assigned by titles. It is not determined by institutional roles. It is shaped by people, by audiences who choose what they pay attention to. And clearly, people are still paying attention. Another argument that often comes up is the comparison to other public figures. Critics question why Harry and Meghan receive such extensive coverage while others do not. But this comparison overlooks something important. Not all stories carry the same weight. Not all individuals generate the same level of engagement. Harry and Meghan's journey is not just about public appearances. It is about a broader narrative that intersects with global conversations about identity, independence, media scrutiny, and personal choice. Their story is layered. It is complex. It is ongoing. And because of that, it continues to resonate. The BBC recognised this. They did not frame their coverage as favouritism. They framed it as responsiveness to audience interest. And that distinction is critical. Because it shifts the conversation from why are they being covered to why are people so interested in them. And the answer to that question is where the real story lies. People are interested because Harry and Meghan represent something that goes beyond traditional narratives. Their journey challenges expectations. It raises questions. It invites discussion. And in a media landscape driven by engagement, those are the kinds of stories that naturally gain traction. Now, let's talk about the broader implications of the BBC's response. This was not just about defending one decision. This was about setting a precedent. By standing firm, the BBC sent a message that editorial independence matters. That decisions will be made based on professional judgment, not external pressure. And that message is important in today's media environment. Because we are living in a time where narratives are constantly contested, where different groups attempt to influence coverage, where criticism can quickly turn into coordinated campaigns. In that context, it becomes even more important for media organisations to hold their ground. To say, we hear the criticism, but we will not let it override our responsibility to the public. That is exactly what happened here. And it is something that deserves recognition. Because let's be honest, there has been a consistent effort to diminish Harry and Meghan's presence in media. And Meghan's presence in media. A push to frame them as irrelevant, as unworthy of attention, as figures who should fade into the background. But reality tells a different story. Every time they make an appearance, people watch. Every time they speak, people listen. Every time they engage in public work, people respond. That level of engagement cannot be manufactured. It cannot be forced. It exists because there is genuine interest. And that is what the BBC acknowledged. They did not create that interest. They responded to it. They did not amplify a narrative. They reflected one that already exists. And that is a crucial distinction, because it reinforces the idea that media coverage is not always about promotion. It is about observation. It is about recognizing what people are already paying attention to and reporting on it. Now, of course, this response has not silenced all criticism. There will always be those who disagree. There will always be those who feel that certain stories should not be covered. But disagreement does not change facts. And the fact remains that Harry and Meghan's story continues to resonate on a global scale. It continues to evolve. It continues to generate conversation. And as long as that is the case, it will continue to be covered. That is not bias. That is reality. So as we look at this moment, it is important to understand what it represents. It represents a clash between two ideas. On one side, there is the belief that media should be controlled, that coverage should align with specific expectations. On the other side, there is the principle that media should reflect public interest, that it should respond to what audiences engage with. The BBC chose the second path. They chose to prioritise their audience. They chose to stand by their editorial judgment. They chose to resist pressure, and in doing so, they reinforced the foundation of what journalism is supposed to be. Now let's talk about why this matters beyond this specific situation. Because this is not just about one story or one couple. This is about the broader relationship between media and audience. It is about who gets to decide what is relevant. Is it a group of critics? Or is it the millions of people who engage with content every day? The answer, as demonstrated here, is clear. It is the audience. And the audience has shown, repeatedly, that Harry and Meghan remain a topic of interest. This is why their Australian visit attracted attention. This is why their activities continue to be reported. This is why their story remains part of global conversations. And this is why attempts to silence that coverage have not succeeded. Because you cannot erase interest. You cannot dictate curiosity. You cannot force people to stop paying attention to something that resonates with them. And that is the reality that this situation highlights. Now, as we continue this discussion, it is also important to acknowledge the role of media responsibility. Standing firm does not mean being above critique. It means being accountable to the right standards. And in this case, the BBC demonstrated that they are willing to engage with criticism without being controlled by it. They did not ignore the complaints. They addressed them. But they addressed them in a way that reaffirmed their commitment to their audience. And that balance is important, because it shows that listening does not have to mean conceding. It shows that engagement does not have to mean compromise. It shows that media organisations can remain responsive without losing their independence. And that is exactly what we saw here. So once again, this is a moment worth acknowledging, because it sends a message that public interest matters, a message that editorial independence matters, a message that stories that resonate will continue to be told, and a message that attempts to control narratives through pressure will not always succeed. Now, let's expand this conversation even further by looking at the emotional dimension behind all of this. Because beyond the headlines, beyond the statements, beyond the criticism, there is a deeper layer to why this topic continues to generate such strong reactions. Harry and Meghan's story has become symbolic for many people. It represents autonomy, choice, and the ability to redefine one's path despite expectations. That is why their journey resonates on a human level, not just a media level. People see themselves in stories of change. People connect with narratives of stepping away from systems that no longer serve them. People are drawn to individuals who challenge established norms and carve out new spaces for themselves. And that emotional connection fuels interest. It is not just about curiosity. It is about relatability. That is something critics often overlook. They treat coverage as if it exists in a vacuum, detached from human experience. But in reality, the stories that gain traction are the ones that people feel connected to. And Harry and Meghan's story is one of those. That is why conversations about them continue. That is why coverage continues. That is why coverage continues. That is why attempts to silence that coverage have not worked. Because you cannot disconnect a story from the people who see meaning in it. And that brings us back to the BBC. Their response did not just acknowledge public interest, it acknowledged this deeper connection. Whether directly or indirectly, they recognise that this is a story people care about, and caring is what drives engagement. Now let's also address another important point, the idea of fairness in media coverage. Critics often frame their arguments around fairness, suggesting that covering Harry and Meghan extensively is somehow unequal treatment. But fairness in journalism is not about equal airtime for everyone. It is about accurately reflecting what matters to the public. It is about covering stories that are relevant, timely, and impactful. And by that standard, coverage of Harry and Meghan is justified. Because their story meets all of those criteria. It is relevant. It is timely. It is impactful. And most importantly, it is widely followed. So the question is not whether they should be covered. The question is why their story continues to hold such a strong place in public discourse. And once again, the answer comes back to interest, connection, and relevance. Now, as we move toward the conclusion of this discussion, let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. What we are seeing here is a reflection of how modern media operates. It is dynamic. It is responsive. It is shaped by the interaction between content and audience. And in that environment, stories that resonate will always find a way to be told. No amount of criticism can change that. No amount of pressure can erase that. Because at the end of the day, media follows attention. And attention follows interest. And interest in this case remains firmly on Harry and Meghan. So to the BBC, once again, this moment deserves recognition. Thank you for standing firm. Thank you for choosing editorial independence. Thank you for acknowledging what your audience cares about. And thank you for not allowing external pressure to dictate your coverage. Because decisions like this shape the media landscape. They set expectations. They define standards. And they remind everyone watching that journalism, at its core, is about serving the public. To everyone watching, thank you for being part of this conversation. Thank you for engaging, for thinking critically, and for contributing to discussions that go beyond surface-level headlines. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps this channel grow and allows us to continue bringing you thoughtful and engaging content. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think about the BBC's response? Do you believe media organisations should always prioritise public interest, even in the face of criticism? We would love to hear from you. Until next time, take care, stay informed, and we will see you in the next video. Bye.